Hey, so you're probably looking over the internet to create some sort of acid patch for your Microfreak, and I thought I'd go over the patch I set up for my last track, where talk a bit about the patchings themselves and how I use the Arpeggiator to create the sequences, just leaving a bit of history about this style of music. It usually stems from the TB303 because of interesting story. It was a commercial failure in the early days and they stopped production, but because units were so cheap to pick up, its sort of constraints led to a very unique style of music that emerged. So we're going to have a look at the TB303 and then see if we can apply those sort of methodologies on the Microfreak. So here's my very sophisticated Roland. Now, it's quite a simple synth, like it's only got a few buttons on that, but you could pull off a lot of character with this machine. So some things are pretty straightforward, like cutoff and resonance, we've got that. Envelope mod and decay, which we can control by the envelope. We can accent using the sequence itself. We can add the slide with the glide knob, and we can change the tuning with the oscillator. Now, the oscillator waveforms that we have here is a saw and a square wave, which are really bright oscillator types, which we can easily mimic here. So let's jump straight in and start building the patch. I'll start by making an initialized patch. Cool. Next we'll start focusing on the oscillator. So we want something that's quite bright. I'll just pick the virtual analog version. Cool. And then probably just leave it there. We'll move on to the filter, which is the majority of this sound. So drop it right down. And if we add some resonance, we're starting to get that squelchy sound already. So next part I usually jump to is the envelope. Now we're using this to control the amplitude, but also the filter. So we've got this knob here that allows us to control what's happening here. Drop the sustain, drop the attack. We have this little stabby sort of bass sound. Cool. And if we drop this one down, just keep filling until you get that squelch. We'll probably drop it an octave. There we go. So that's pretty much the basic sort of bass sound. Now, one thing I do like about the TB303 is a little distortion. This unit doesn't have distortion, but we can sort of mimic it by really modulating a couple of the oscillator knobs. So I'm going to use the cycling envelope for this one because it gives us this nice little knob here to control the amount that we can do. And then I'm just going to make this as short as possible without being zero. So something quite narrow. There we go. Make sure there's no sustain. And then we're going to apply that in the matrix. Now this little thing is a really cool way of patching points together. So first off, we're going to go the cycle. So there's a nice little marker where we are. And we're going to modulate the timbre. So if we move it across to, we're in there. We push this white knob down, which allows us to edit the value. I'm going to turn it right up. I'm going to hit the key and then turn it into nice bit of distortion. We can make it a bit. Cool. So that's our distortion setup. Now I do like adding a bit of randomized glide to my sequence. So I'm going to use this LFO. So I'm going to change it to a sample and hold, which just creates voltages that I can pick from. And then what we can do with the rate is apply it to the glide knob. So on this matrix mixer, we don't have a glide function, but we could hold this button down here, twiddle the glide knob, and then we can set glide there. And then we move this marker from the LFO line and then we put it under that glide function. Now, we don't need much of this, just enough to give it a bit of variance, but we'll turn it up to probably about there. Cool. We'll deset that. So now we have a glide that's randomized, we have an oscillator that we can distort, and we've got that bass sort of sound. We can fiddle with this cutoff area here, but we can also change the amount over here depending on the envelope. We can change how long the notes are. We can add a bit of distortion. So that's the basic patch layout. Next we'll move on to the sequencer. Well, actually I didn't use a sequencer, I just used the Arpeggiator. Now if we just have it turn on, it's pretty boring, but this is where Spice and Dice come in. Now, these are two little randomizers that have a bit of unique character to them. What's happening is Dice randomizes Spice and Spice randomizes the patch. So if I turn on Spice, get that Arpeggiator going, the more that I add, it will start changing the pitch, and then it will start changing the envelope. And then if you keep going up, it'll start changing the gate. And then if we keep going up to the top, it'll get really crazy in what it's firing off. So that by itself, really cool way to create sequences, because what happens is it's not just creating a random every interval, it's actually going by the sequence itself. So every step of the sequence is being randomized. So it will create these randomized loops that we can use to create different patterns. So if we start that up again, say we want to change it to part B, we can use Dice now to hold down, and we'll change up that sequence. And so if we find something that we like, we can just hit the Spice, and then that will be tied into up here. Cool, so that's pretty much how I use Spice and Dice, and the other part was, because it's tied to one note, you can actually program in a bunch of different notes and then use the Arpeggiator types, but I was just hitting one key during the thing so I could control what the sound was, and I believe it was a blues scale that I was mucking around with. And yeah, that was basically the patch. So I hope that's helped you along the way of creating a different style of music with this track, or giving you some pointers that you could think about for other ways you could use these boxes. Now, you don't have to physically follow what I've done, just use those ideas to create different versions of patchings, or have fun mucking around with the sound itself, because a lot of this is just experimentation, and whatever comes out of it really does define what you do. So I hope that's brought some inspiration to your tracks, and I hope to hear what you've got so far. Also, if you want to ask any questions about the types of boxes I have, or the Microfreak in general, feel free to leave them in the comments below. I do come around and try and answer as much as I can. And we'll see what the next track will be, and I'll keep trying to keep these tutorials with them. So you have a good time and stay safe, and I'll see you next week.